my paper on internal migration and marital sorting in Indonesia. So this will be my job market paper in the upcoming semesters. So any comments and suggestions are very welcome. So the main or basic observation that kind of motivated this idea is that marriage and migration often coincide in their timing in life. So, for example, if we look at the context of Indonesia, we see that around 46% of male migrants and 60% of female migrants are married at the time of moving. And around 32% of men and 45% of women are not moving alone, so they bring their spouse or their family with them. And marriage can also be a reason for migration. For example, if we consider locality norms that might govern if the wife is moving to the husband's household or vice versa, or they set up a household altogether. These type of norms and traditions are also present in Indonesia. And this also is reflected in the data, as we see that around 13% of men and 22% of women indicate that the main purpose of their move was marriage. So marriage and migration are concurrent life events, and they the decisions may also be interlinked. So, for example, if you consider that the marital status can affect the choice of location through wage amenity trade-offs. So, if we think about a migrant that is moving with their family, they might value the wages and amenities differently in their choice of destination compared to someone who moves alone. On the other hand, if we have some individual migration barriers, which could be the case in contexts where women cannot move freely by themselves, for example, then they might overcome these barriers by joint migration. And lastly, finding a spouse away from where you live may also be a way to diversify local risks and to have an insurance mechanism for income smoothing. So my question basically in this paper is if location preferences affect who, if, and where to marry. And in particular, in this paper, I have two research questions. The first one is, what role do location preferences play in the marriage decision? And the second one, what are the consequences of incentivizing migration on the marriage market? And for this, I'm using a model that allows for sorting over location preferences and education in the marriage decision. And with this model, I measure then the migration barriers in the form of disutility for independent and joint migrants. And lastly, I then explore a counterfactual analysis to examine the equilibrium effects on the marriage market of removing these barriers. So what I find so far is that the urban location and the economic activity of the location are relevant for marriage utility, and that reducing migration barriers, or I should say eliminating migration barriers in the form of this utility, primarily incentivizes joint migration, which then also implies a certain trade-off between marriage migration and joint migration. So with this paper, I mainly contribute to three strands of the literature. The first one on assortative mating and determinants of matching, that has primarily looked at socioeconomic indicators particularly the education of spouses, and less is known about the role of location or the local conditions, with the exception of a couple of papers that look at the role of urban marriage markets and labor markets. And so here I offer more evidence on how combined spousal and location preferences may shape marriage decisions. And secondly, on economic drivers of marriage migration, which I think is a quite sparse literature in itself, but some papers have looked at how income shocks are affecting marriage migration. And as I mentioned before, also the role of diversification of income by marriage migration. And so here, I also aim to add a little bit more information or evidence and understanding about the role of economic characteristics of the destination for driving marriage migration. And lastly, on the costs and barriers of internal migration, which has recently shifted a little bit to understanding the differences between the monetary barriers and amenities, and in particular the role of family migration. And again, here I offer another way or a novel way to understand the interactions between migration barriers and marriage markets, and how independent and joint migrant barriers might be different. Okay, so I'll come to the data and the variables, if there's no questions. So the data comes from the Indonesia Family Life Survey in 2014, where I take singles, never married men and women, and married men and women of the ages 25 plus for men and 29 plus for women. So I choose this age group in order to have a sample that where in expectation people have made their marriage decision. And I take their education levels and the origin, so that will be the location where they lived when they were 12 years old, as well as the current location. So here I'm interested in particular if the place is a rural or urban place, and the labor force participation rate at the Regency level. So this I take as a proxy for economic activity. So I just wanted to briefly mention that I take the labor force participation rate because, as you might, or as you can see here, the labor force participation rate varies a lot in the country, and as you can see, in rural places, the labor force participation rate is quite high, also compared to urban regencies. And the wage employment is, on the other hand, very low. So what I wanted to achieve with by including the labor force participation as an economic proxy is to avoid foregoing some information on how economically active a rural place might be. Okay, so here's a bit of a snapshot of what the sample looks like. So as you can see, most men and women are married in the sample, which is also due to the fact that I am choosing exactly that kind of sample that should have made the marriage decision. And marriage is very prevalent in Indonesia. And we can also see that around 70% of the population were born in a rural place, but only compared to this, only 42% live currently in a rural area, which is shows also the level of urbanization. And we have a fairly high share of men and women with a high school degree or higher. And so I'm going to use these variables in order to have the personal characteristics of the spouses or the single men and women, as well as their location characteristics. So in the model, I'm going to use discrete variables, which are for the education, low or high education. So high education would be someone with a high school degree or higher. And within the personal characteristics, I'm also going to include the origin, which is, as I mentioned earlier, either rural or urban, and has a low or high labor force participation rate. And so this is in relation to the country average. And the location characteristics are going to be similar or the same as the origin characteristics. So then what I observe in the data are couples and singles by each type and each location. That I can then distinguish the natives, which are those that have the same origin characteristics as the location characteristics. For migrants, obviously, that would be those with different characteristics of the origin and the location where they live in now. And I can also identify mixed couples, which are those where both spouses have different origins. And here, this is also including those that have a migrant spouse and a native spouse, where this implies that the migrant spouse has entered the destination marriage market, basically. Okay, so coming to the model, I wanted to give you a brief overview, kind of as a conceptual framework to understand what I have in mind with the choices in the model. So basically, men and women face two coinciding decisions. First, or they decide who and if they want to marry, and where they want to live. And so this gives them several potential choices. They can choose to stay single and also stay at home. They can find a spouse and stay at home with them, so in the origin. They can find a spouse and move together, and they can move first and then find a spouse at the destination. And lastly, they could also move and stay single. So they make these decisions based on their preferences for a type of spouse and a type of location. So for example, this will also be dependent on who you are. So for example, if you're highly educated, you might search for a highly educated spouse, but you also have a preference perhaps for someone from your community. And you might also want to end up living in the city, so in an urban place with good job market opportunities. So more formally, let me go directly to the maximization problem. So men and women choose their spouse's type or singlehood and the location type according to their utility maximization. So we have for men, let's say a man I and a woman J, they face equivalent utility maximizations where they choose their partner's type and they choose the location based on a utility that they receive from marriage, where they receive a joint utility if they match together. They receive a joint utility that they share based on the quality of the match. And they also have a reserve utility for staying single by type of location. And as you can see, this is also the utilities are also partly governed by a idiosyncratic taste parameter, which is extreme value type 1 distributed. And so with this type of two-sided maximization problem, we can find a equilibrium matching that I'm going to denote by mu. That is basically the collection of matches of each type of couple in each location and the types of singles in each location. And this matching is directly linked to the utilities of couples and singles through these functions. So the utility of a couple with these types X, Y in location C is a function of the observed matchings in the data, and similarly the singles utilities are linked to the masses of singles in each location in the data. So to visualize this a little bit better, what I intend to kind of extract of the utilities is to decompose for the couples utilities the part of the utility that comes from education matching, which is a common indicator of matches in the literature. And apart from this, a utility that comes from being a native couple, so where both spouses are from this same origin and they live there. Apart from the utility that comes from joint migration, and a part of the utility that comes from being in a mixed couple. And for single men, I can decompose into a native utility and the migrant utility and being an educated migrant. So this is kind of to visualize the parts of the utilities that I'm interested in, and so I'm going to estimate those utilities by linear parameters. So in practice, I will decompose these utilities by a linear function in parameters that have are for the similarity in education by each level, the similarity in origin coming from the native couples by each location, parameters for joint migration by each origin destination pair, and parameters for marriage migration or the utility or the matching in mixed couples from different origins and different destinations, and single migration by each origin destination pair. So these are going to be a long list of parameters where I try to fit the data well, and also these parameters are going to allow me to do the counterfactual analysis later on. Yeah, in general, it's a lot of parameters. So I just wanted to show the general kind of estimation equation, which is can be, so the parameters can be estimated by PPML, which was introduced by this paper of Galichon and Salanier in 2024. And basically, it's very similar to a gravity equation, but with weights on the joint utility parameters, and we have basically type fixed effects here, and these also need to be weighted for the couples. So so again, I have a lot of parameters, and it's a little bit difficult to interpret those this very flexible very interacted model. So instead, I wanted to show a more simplified version of it that still gives the same kind of implications of what I find when I use the more flexible model. And so here, these are basically the estimation results for some parameters that I chose here. As we can see, for single migration, both male and female single migration is related to negative utility. So these are pretty small, these coefficients, and also not statistically significant because I don't observe a lot of singles in the first place. But for couples, you can see that having the same education is related to a positive utility. So in other words, this kind of indicates assortative mating in education. And similarly, then if we include matching on the same origin, there's also positive utility related to that. However, if we compare these to joint migrants, which also have the same origin, but they live in a different destination from home, you see that basically this reduces the utility from matching on origin. So still, if you compare the differences here, still they will have a positive utility, but it's lower than the origin. Sophie, you have a question?
Just a small clarification about same education. So if I understand well, you can compare the utility from same education versus different education, but it's not possible to identify who has more, right? Like for instance, maybe there's utility from having a husband who's more educated than you, but not the other way around. So it's not possible to identify.
So it is. So you could simply add another indicator for the wife or the husband having a higher education, for example. What you can't identify is who in the couple receives basically the higher share of being in a same education or same or hypergamous couple.
I see. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I also take the opportunity to ask another clarification question.
Yeah.
Was asked on the chat by Catherine Millock about the descriptive statistic on the marriage market, and to understand more if the assumption is that the people choose labor market participation first or marriage or not first.
Okay, sorry, can you repeat it? Was this to a certain slide or was it here?
It was asked like 10 minutes ago.
Okay. So sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay, it was on previous slide. But basically, so it's information on the marriage age. So if you have information on the, I don't know, the mean age at marriage or something like this. And
okay.
also on the, and on the assumption that you're making, so are people choosing first their labor market participation or not, or the fact to marry or not? Okay.
So regarding the average age of marriage, so we have, so in this survey, basically the average age is for women around 19, and for men I think 23, because they have an average age gap of 4 years always. And so by age 25, I think I chose the 90%, or basically 90% of men and women are married by these ages. And then regarding the assumption of when they choose, so in the model, basically, the choice is simultaneous. So it's not a how do you say, subsequent choice, but the idea is that if we observe someone that is single in another destination, for example, then they, because of the fact that that I assume that they are not, they have made their marriage decision and they're not going to get married in the future, then if someone has moved and is still single, that would be someone who has decided to enter the destination, for example, due to labor market reasons, and not for marriage reasons. And if, for example, I have a couple that is from the same origin in another destination, then I assume that they have met at home and moved together. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so I think I was here. Right. So also I added some indicators for mixed marriages. So this would be marriages that have a male migrant or a female migrant in an urban location. And so here I just restricted to those that are married to a native urban spouse, to have an idea of basically the marriage market value of this place. And so as you can see, for both men and women migrating to marry someone in an urban location, this is also has a positive utility, and actually quite similar by gender. And for those places that, so basically here I have mixed marriages where the male migrant or the female migrant moved from a low labor force participation rate origin to a high type origin. So these are related to negative utilities. So what I also find in the more extensive model is that basically moves across labor force participation rates, either in either direction, are related to negative utilities. So actually this is something that I'm still trying to understand, and also trying to see with other proxies if this is a true effect or a true result, or if this is due to how I define this proxy. All right. Okay. So next. So basically, these again is this simplified model, and I then estimate the parameters for the more complex model, and then I define this utility of migration, which is from an origin O to a destination D, which will be the difference between the native utility at the origin and the migrant utility at the destination. So for both independent migrants and for joint migrants. So just to come back here, so maybe I can show just briefly these parameters. What that implies is that I have fully flexible parameters for the origin and destination pair, and at this diagonal, those are the native the native utility, basically. And so then the difference between this part of the utility and this part of the utility is then what I define as the migration disutility. Okay, and so this can be understood as a composite measure of the monetary costs of migration and the utility differences, for example, from amenities. And by doing all these differences, what I find is that there's a higher disutility from moving to a rural area, to rural destinations. So again, this can be due to both costs, but also to amenities that might not be very utility enhancing, let's say. There's also, again, as I mentioned, a higher disutility from moving across levels of economic activity, so both from low to high and also from high to low labor force participation rates. And these patterns are similar for joint migrants and individual migrants, in the sense that they go in the same directions, and they both show these kind of results. So with this, I would come to the counterfactual analysis. So in the counterfactual, I use basically these utilities, and I eliminate them. So first, I'm going to assume that in mixed couples, only the migrant spouse incurred a utility cost from single migration. So what that allows me to do is to use the cost from single migration as a proxy cost for marriage migration, or for the cost of migration in mixed couples. And then I simply, so the exercise is pretty simple. I just eliminate the disutility from migration by imposing the native utility at each origin to the migrant's utility at the destination. So in other words, if I have a couple that moves from a rural to a rural origin to an urban destination, and what they would receive in terms of utility in their in their rural origin, I impose to what they receive at the destination. So in that way, the disutility is eliminated. And then I recalibrate new equilibrium matching from these counterfactual utilities by using a fixed point algorithm to find a stable equilibrium. So here's basically the main result from this exercise, where I have the differences in the choices that men and women make from the baseline to the counterfactual case. And I split between the rural-born and the urban-born men and women. But as you can see, the qualitative directions are quite similar. And so if we start with the singles, we see that both in the rural places and in the urban places, we see a reduction in the single natives with a small increase in the single migrants. So this is a little bit more pronounced for the urban-born population. So here we see that some of those singles that would have otherwise stayed at home are selecting into migrating by themselves, and migrating by themselves and staying single. While in the rural places, there's very little difference, and there are some more native singles that then select into into marriage rather than single migration. And then we see that the group that's most affected are those that are marrying and staying at home. So those native couples, which is reduced in the counterfactual. And we also see that those joint migrant couples, so those that marry at home and then move together, those are increasing.
You have 5 minutes left. Sorry.
5 minutes. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Okay, so basically, what this shows is that that native in the counterfactual couples that would have otherwise stayed at home now select into joint migration. And we also see that part of these new joint migrants come from those that would have otherwise migrated alone and found a spouse in the destination. So here I interpret this as a trade-off in the sense that there were in the baseline some men and women that had a higher incentive to be in that destination, but in the counterfactual case, when it is less or when it's not costly to move together with your spouse, they end up finding a spouse in their origin and moving together. And so then just briefly, I can also tell you a few things about where they go. And so these are the shares of migrants, just generally migrants in the baseline and in the counterfactual, going to rural destinations and to urban destinations. And what you might see is that the rural destinations, the share of migrants going to rural destinations increases. And that's because of the fact that those destinations were previously less attractive or had a higher disutility. And so there's a shift to those destinations. But just generally, the shares to urban destinations are still higher, but there's more of an equalizing effect. And so maybe just very briefly, I can show you that it seems that those destination decisions also mainly come from the joint couples that then shift their moves to these new destinations. Okay, so I also have some work in progress on what that implies for households welfare. But first, I look at the educational sorting, which I have not touched really, but this is also a variable in my model. So I look at some sorting in marriages and in destinations on education. And I also think that there are some implications that could be interesting to see in terms of labor force participation of these migrants. So I'm still working on this, but since I'm almost out of time, I think I'll just conclude. And so what I do in this paper is to use a model of marriage decisions where location preferences enter. What I find is that there's a relevance of the urban location, which is positively associated to more utility from marriage, and a negative effect from moving across different economic activities. And by eliminating the barriers from migration in the form of this utility, this incentivizes joint migration with some trade-offs with marriage migration, and it leads to a shift to rural and low economic activity destinations which are the ones that had higher disutility previously. And primarily, this is driven by joint migration. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ariane, for this presentation. So now we will listen to the discussion of Sophie. So you will have 10 minutes for the discussion, and then afterwards, Ariane will have some time to answer to some comments.
Thank you. So first of all, thanks a lot for your talk, Ariane. I really enjoyed reading your paper, and I mean, I know what the actual model is, and I saw how you managed to present it today, and I can see you did a great job at making it simple and accessible, because I know it's not. And so yeah, I think congrats for that, because you made it really accessible. I really liked how you are presenting it. So I think that what you're doing and your contribution are pretty clear, so I'm going to skip to the main strengths. So the first thing is that you have a paper that highlights these interactions between marriage and migration decisions, and it's really important because you managed to show that couples have different migration barriers than singles, and you show that very well with your counterfactuals. So I think that's an important result that you have. And you also estimate a multidimensional structural model that I know is quite difficult to estimate. So I think that's another big strength of your paper, this technical aspect of what you solved. And it's also a topic that's very policy relevant. Easing this migration cost is something that could have important impact in terms of household mobility, regional inequality, and human capital dispersion. So it's a topic that's very important. Now moving on to the concern, I think that the main thing I thought about was about this migration costs that, as you explained, is something a bit tricky. So currently what you're doing is that you consider the surplus of a native in origin O and the surplus of a migrant from the same place O, which goes to destination D, and that allows you to compute the difference, which is the cost of leaving home. And as you said, in this difference, you actually also have some other elements. For instance, the difference in utility from having different amenities in DNO, which is not directly a migration cost, but also I thought what could be a potential concern is if you assume that people choose optimally what they do, then it has to be that people who chose to migrate did so optimally. So probably their utility from staying home in there for some reason that you might not observe would have been lower. So I've been thinking that maybe for them the counterfactual would not have been to have the surplus of a native in origin O, because from some region you cannot observe, it was optimal for them to migrate. So in that sense, I thought maybe it could be interesting to also consider the difference in the surplus with the people at destination who are native. And in that case, that wouldn't be the cost of leaving home. That would be the cost of being a migrant in D. So it would be the difference between the surplus of a migrant in from O that goes to D and a native from D in D. And then that would be, how much it costs you to be a migrant rather than a native. So you would be controlling for the specific amenities of D and for the fact that these migrants, for them, it was optimal to migrate, but simply it might be less utility for them to be a migrant versus not being a migrant at destination. So for instance, they don't have the same networks as a native, they have to adapt and so on. So yeah, instead of cost of living home, I was wondering if it could be interesting to consider the cost of being a migrant at destination. And then if you do that, the only thing is you could not, I looked at it and I think you could not do a counterfactual where you remove all the cost of migration, because if you do that, in the counterfactual, all the surplus is going to depend from the destination and not the origin. And so you will probably predict that everyone goes to the high amenity location. So I think what could work if you did that would be to not remove completely cost, but maybe, for instance, divide cost by 2. And so you would do surplus of native in D minus migrants from O in D and divide by 2. And so in the counterfactual, you would remove that from the surplus of the native in D. And in that way, you would still have something that depends on the origin, And in that case, it would be, the cost of being a migrant. So if it's an outcome that can be interesting to you as well, I thought it could be interesting. And some more minor comments. So one of them was the intuition behind the mechanism of migration costs. So I was wondering if in the data there was something that could provide intuition, such as how much it costs you to live at home versus being a migrant. Maybe at home you live in the house of your family. Or I was just wondering if it was something you could capture, and then in terms of policy, maybe suggest some specific policy recommendation if that was possible. And then I think that for a lot of the stuff I had noted here, these are actually things that you're having now, that you wrote in your work in progress. So I can see that you're already actually planning to do it. One of the things that I found quite interesting is how you could have higher surplus for single migrants who are women compared to single migrants who are men. And I was wondering if, labor force participation could be a factor for that. Maybe these women are more likely to participate and they wouldn't have at home. And so for them, it's somehow bringing more surplus. I don't know if that's the case, but I just thought it could be interesting. And so to summarize, I think that this paper offers a novel contribution to understand joint dynamics of marriage market and migration in a developing country. So it's, I think, an important contribution. And the structural work that Ariane did is also, I think, pretty impressive. And she managed to have a lot of different alternatives and understand how they might interact. And it also yields important insight for household dynamics and regional inequality.
Thanks a lot for this discussion, Sophie. So Ariane, if you want to answer some of the comments.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sophie. That's super helpful. And I think, yeah, I'm gonna ask you for your suggestions and your slides for sure, because the first point that you made, I was thinking about it quite a lot when I, at the beginning, when I constructed this counterfactual. I mean, obviously, I have to acknowledge that this way of measuring within this model is not perfect in the sense of what you could do when you have a more migration-focused model, and you can add maybe more on the differences between the physical costs or monetary costs and the amenities, which I was not really able to incorporate in this model, but I was thinking exactly about which would be the more appropriate counterfactual, and so I landed first on this, that the difference in utility is what you would get from if you were to stay at home. I thought that was a little bit more let's say intuitive in the sense of that you have to incur something to move away from home, but I really like the idea to compare this to a counterfactual, perhaps, that where you have the utility of someone that is a native in that place where you live, because I think that's a very good point, that this would mean that you have the networks and so on, and can enjoy the amenities in that destination. So yeah, so that's a very good point. Thank you very much. And then regarding the the intuition of the migration costs, I think that also is with respect to this point a little bit, that now these costs are kind of bunching a whole lot of things together, but I think I also need to do a little bit more in the paper to describe the intuition, at least a little bit better, and also give some maybe descriptive results on this, because in my idea is that if you move away from home, you do lose your family networks, especially in those countries where that is very important. You lose the family networks, especially if the distances are very large. And my idea is also a little bit that if you instead of migrating alone, if you end up marrying someone from the destination, then you kind of access part of their networks and their whatever it is that they can offer in terms of knowing the place and having better access to different amenities. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about, but I have to make it a little bit more concrete in the paper. Policy recommendations. I think at this point I'm abstracting a little bit from this because I make a lot of assumptions on these, amenities and cost differences. But again, I think that's a point that I need to address. And the last point about the single migrants, single migrant women's surplus that is higher than the men's. I have to look into this a little bit because I have not made too much. I have not focused too much on this. First of all, because singles are not really my focus in this paper, and also because I observe a very few of them and can make very few. Can interpret it very little. So, but that's something I'll look into too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now we have some time to answer some questions of the participants. So if you have any questions, please write them in the Q&A.
I was just wondering, so from your last answer, so you said that you have a very low number of women migrating alone, like unmarried women migrating alone, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's either women already married moving or women moving like with an existing household?
Exactly. So either moving, with the spouse or being married at the destination.
Okay.
That I do observe, but I can only infer kind of on the migration costs or migration barriers from the single migrants.
Okay.
And those are very few in the sample.
I don't know how few they are, but like maybe if you can look at the heterogeneity of destination between single women and women who move with the family, it could be like interesting to see if they have different motivations.
Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's a good point. I haven't checked that yet.
If you have like very few single women, like it's
yeah, but maybe there's still something that I can extract from that. Yeah. Thanks.
Like if you want to directly ask a question, we can promote you as panelist as well. So please tell us. Yes, Catherine.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I think
Yes.
that you
Yes.
Yeah, hi, Ariane. Very nice, nice
perfect.
work. Can I ask you, I was wondering if your results that you presented could be conditional on the matching, that is the difference in the education level between the husband and the spouse. I guess this is what you want, what you put on your slide that you're going to pursue later on, right? And I think that could be important, right? That your results could depend on this, how big the difference is in their education level.
Yeah, right. So exactly. So this is what I condition on at the moment, but
Okay.
so those results are basically net of the education matching in a sense. But this education matching is also kind of an equilibrium result that I can look into in the counterfactual, because I will see this is not something that I'm changing, let's say, or like fixing in the counterfactual. So I see that there's different sorting going on in the counterfactual compared to the baseline. So I don't know if that answers your question, because what I don't do is to condition on, let's say, the masses of educated men and women in a particular place. So it's more of how much do they care about education matching, and then by the equilibrium changing, that might also change how they're able to match with someone of a specific education level.
Okay, thanks. I was thinking about the former, so and that you have already accounted for.
Yeah.
But the other issue could be relevant too.
Okay, thanks so much. Yeah.
Also, I was thinking, I don't really know the situation in Indonesia, like if the tradition is more to be matrilocal or patrilocal, and if you have a heterogeneity between different ethnicities related to this.
Yeah. So I don't have any statistics on this in this paper, or because I'm not directly using it. I just use basically the fact that we do see both of those things happening. I think that matrilocality is more prevalent, if I'm not mistaken, but I don't want to make any wrong claims here. But there are also papers on using basically the different locality norms in Indonesia, and seeing how this is, for example, affected by policy changes and so on.
Okay, yeah, because again, it could be interesting to compare, I don't know, women from matrilocal against patrilocal communities, like how do they move, and if some move more than others. But okay.
Yeah, for sure.